and I'm going to kick it off here. So, Prolet, thank you so much for joining. For those of you who are joining and have not met me before, Divya Smith, I'm CEO of Ascending Avenue Investments, and I have about 95 million assets under management. I have 5 buildings. 2 I'm invested in Arizona, and then 3 that are in Texas. Well, third one I'm working on. And it's been a privilege for me to be able to go from my corporate job and be a passive investor for part of my journey, and then be able to do active investments in real estate and be able to share my knowledge with other folks. So that's a high level background about me. And throughout the conversation today, you will see me share in my perspective as Prolet shares her perspective as well. And Prolet, would love to, introduce you, just a quick short sentence, and would love for you to kind of share a little bit more. But Prolet has been in analytics and technology herself. I love her heart. She always calls herself, hey, like in my fun nerd time, and she'll talk about all the things that she's developing. So one of the things that I just really connected well with Prolet is she's a full-time passive investor, but she still decides and wants to do more of the things that she enjoys and loves, which is still being in technology and doing analytical conferences and be part of some of those events to share her information and knowledge with others. So thanks for joining us, Prolet. Would love to hear from you and share a little bit about, your background.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and this is great. I always like to share my opinions. For people who know me, it's like, yes, if nothing else, I have opinions, um, and I can tell you a little bit more about my background. You mentioned I have been in technology. I basically spent about 2 decades, a little bit over 2 decades in technology, and my career had progressed kind of going from engineering and then moving into analytics. And in a way, I almost think of my life in decades, because I did engineering for a decade, and then I did analytics for roughly a decade. So now I'm viewing this more as, I guess, more of my real estate decade, but also my, you called it retirement. You said that I was retired on LinkedIn, which
Yes.
I
In
kind of,
quotes.
yes,
Yes.
I'm avoiding that word. I always
I,
think
I,
like, oh, I'm on a
exactly why.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very extended sabbatical. My husband keeps calling it retirement, but I'm gonna dive a little bit more into that too. But
Yeah. Love it.
throughout my corporate life, I was working for a few companies. I was working for Leapfrog. For those of you who are younger here, I probably worked on some of the products that you actually played with when you were a kid, or for those who have kids, probably the
Yeah.
uh, worked on products that are used by kids. And then I spent some time with Autodesk, and my final stint in technology was as a director of analytics for DocuSign, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard about here, considering we do a lot of signing as part of our deals.
Correct. How did you first learn about passive investing?
Yeah. So I kind of, in a way, almost fell into it. And this was like a while back. So this is more than 15 years ago. And it's really when I first purchased my house as my first primary home. And I started kind of thinking about that whole process and thinking about being a renter versus being a homeowner, and going through like, well, how does it work? You do all these calculations about rent versus own and all this other stuff. And at that point, I started learning a lot more about single family investing. And at that point, I think it was about 2005, 2006. I mean, everyone know what's happening with the market. It was crazy, and I didn't really have the opportunity to dive into it. But around 2010 and 2011 is when I really decided to be like, oh, I'm going to be a single family investor. I'm gonna buy a bunch of houses. And initially, I bought two houses, which was a great investment in California. And then I started doing all these plans about being a landlord and how many doors, like what we call doors, I had to buy in order to get to the point where I can live off of my income. And I calculated it was quite a lot of doors. It was
Yes.
quite a lot of buildings. And at that time, the biggest resource that was available was really Bigger Pockets. And Bigger Pockets, for those of you not familiar, it's kind of like a forum, a lot of real estate discussions. It was a lot less commercialized at that point. Like that was a decade ago. I think that not, right now it's a lot more commercialized. But I started reading some discussions and some thoughts about, hey, like, well, what about buying a larger property?
Mhm.
At that point, I was working in technology. I was working quite a few hours,
Mhm.
uh, and I somehow ran into one of the forums that was talking about multifamily investing and actually talking about syndications.
Mhm.
And it was an aha moment for me. It was like, oh my God, it's like there's like, why would I go and try and deal with like 30, 40 different houses, like pulling my hair, because at that point I had rentals, so I also had tenants.
Yes.
So I kind of started to get the feel of like, oh, hey, what do you need to do for all of those individual homes? And I was like, oh my God, syndications. This is like amazing. And like, how do you do it? Again, this is like 2012, 2014. At that point, there was so little information. I mean, right now you have your educational programs. There is like a lot of books, and I have a book recommendation that I can give to people as passive investors.
Mhm.
But at that point, there was so little information out there.
Yeah.
It was mostly Bigger Pockets. I think the first book on multifamily passive investing from like really the passive side came out in 2016. The next one was in 2018, and I think the next one was in 2020. And I went through it, I read it, and I was like, this is how I'm going to invest.
Great.
It
Yeah.
just made perfect sense. I did a bunch of calculations on like, returns versus time versus white hair, because now, I have to color my hair because of tenants. So really, it was the aha moment of like, hey, I can actually get the returns I'm getting actually even better from my single family homes.
Mhm.
I don't really have to do the actual work, and I can diversify much easier.
So, Prolet, you shared quite a few pieces of nugget of information there, and
Oh,
I want to just like share a couple and just kind of
yes.
call out for folks. So, first one you shared is you had a single family home, you started to work with renters, but for you to be able to make enough passive income, and I was talking with Kathy in my last webinar, she had done the math similar to you. It was about 75 to 100 single family homes for them to be able to break even on the expenses plus the income replacement that they were looking for their W-2. And that was just unattainable. With having $200 or $300 that you're making per single family home, that got to be a lot of work that you had to do. And like you mentioned, it's just a lot of work when you have so many single family homes and you're working directly with the tenants. You have to, work with plumbers, electricians, what have you. You're working through all of that. So I was going to share a quick little story. I had renters myself, and I was at Disneyland with my kids, and a renter called me, and their garage is not working, and the rental home is in Minneapolis, so it's super cold. They couldn't leave they couldn't move their car out to kind of leave a place. And there I am, like kids are waiting on me to get on a ride, and we couldn't. And we had to just step aside and spend like an hour and a half figuring out how do we get like the garage door to open. So That's just one little example to say, when you passively invest, you are not worried about the day-to-day of the tenants and termites and toilets. Everybody likes to call it the three T's in single family, so you don't have to worry about that. So I love that you called it out. The second thing you called out, which was incredible, is the number of hours you are already working in your job. So for you to take this in addition to that would be a lot of effort and work. And finally, you mentioned the podcast, the you had mentioned, I apologize, just totally forget, it's slipping on bigger
Bigger
pockets.
pockets.
Yeah, so you had mentioned bigger pockets, and couldn't agree more. I think there are more and more podcasts available now than there was before, but I'll also share with you as I talk with multiple investors throughout the week. This information is still hard for a lot of people to get to because there's a small pocket of people who know it. Yes, more resources are available. Now that you hear the word, you'll probably start to kind of learn about it. But not enough information is available, as we call the main street investing, for people to invest in things that are things outside of stocks. So thanks for sharing that. So I love the journey that you've gone through, being a busy professional, then fully kind of passively investing. One of the things is I was going to ask, like, when did you actually start passively investing? And then when were you able to quit your job?
So I started in like 2017, 2018. So that's now how many years? 7 years ago. And I would say I went kind of hard when I first started investing. And well, I went in hard and kind of stupid, frankly, mainly because at that point I also didn't really know as much about how do you invest, what things you need to pay attention to. And I did do a lot of due diligence as part of those, but doing due diligence now after I've done it for 6, 7 years is very different than how I did due diligence when I first started. And when I first started, I really kind of went also very diversified. I went with multiple different sponsors with a certain smaller amount, mainly because I kind of wanted to see, well, hey, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let's see how they perform. Again, those I didn't even know that. I don't think I knew anyone that actually invested in syndication. So, like, hey, for those of you that are here, you already know two people. Well, you know Divya probably more than me now. You hopefully get to know me a little bit more, but you know two people that actually have done it. It was really hard when you don't. So I started initially with just kind of like going and investing with multiple different sponsors, multiple different investments. Um, and kind of then going from there.
Okay.
It really, one thing that I would say for new investors though is it's really, really hard to understand and imagine how this can work.
Right.
And until you literally either start getting your checks or actually more appropriately after your first full cycle, until then, you're probably not going to actually realize the power of passive investing in real estate and not really kind of understand all the cool things that real estate investing can give you.
Yeah, sounds
So
good. So, one of the things I was going to kind of go back is you said you started investing in 2017, 2018. So about in 6 years. And when did you actually quit your job?
I quit my job in 2022.
Okay, so about 4 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. But let me preface it. So
Yeah.
I am also a very big proponent of diversification. My portfolio is not all real estate, although I would say that outside of my primary home, I am about 60% in real estate. The rest of it is kind of like a couple of angel investments and primarily the market. So I am really big proponent of like you shouldn't be 100% in real estate. So my retirement is a function of basically my overall portfolio, and that includes all of my investments, including on the real estate, the syndications, but also some of I have two rentals that I still kind of hold and I get income for
From
different
those.
reasons.
So I think you and I are very close on that. So my goal is about 50-50 in real estate, the other 50% continue to be other assets. So you said about 60% in real estate, maybe 10 or 20% in angel investing, and then another 20% in what we call the Wall Street, investing. So in stocks and other things.
Yes.
Okay, understood. One of the things you kind of walked us through a little bit already, but just to kind of spell it out for folks here. So when you had started passively investing, what was the point you started to realize that you would be able to quit your job? What were the steps? What kind of metrics and things were you looking at that time?
I was definitely looking at the cash flow I was generating, but I was also looking at more the projected what it's gonna look like in X number of years.
Mhm.
If you can go just by cash flow, but again, because I have a diversified portfolio, my goal for depleting that portfolio was both a combination of the cash flow plus if I need to use some of my stock portfolio, I can. So it's a combination, but it was also very much about the projection of what happens not just this 1 year, but also in the future. And given the current state of real estate, I think that is the appropriate way, because a lot of people might just get caught up on the cash flow. You have to think about it more holistically of what that return will be upon exit. Because realistically, 60, 70, sometimes even more percent of your return happens on exit, not as part of your cash flow.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And so I'm with you on kind of that same journey as well, right? So when you started to invest, you kind of create this Excel spreadsheet. And it's funny, like of course we love spreadsheets, and it's kind of the projection that you're getting the cash flow, and I almost ignore it sometimes and look at that 5 year mark or 3 to 5 year mark. So I usually average it about 4 years. But what would be my return at the end of 4 years? And then can I reinvest it or reinvest part of it and use some depreciation benefits to offset my gains and then keep reinvesting it? So at the end of about 3 to 4 years, if you've been investing, let's say even 100,000 each year, by year 4 or 5, you're going to start to see double of those investments, and you'll start to really understand, okay, now my cash flow can cover my expenses. So if this is something really, interesting to you and you want to map out, how do you get to from being working full time to maybe partly working, part time or fully kind of going into being a passive investor, that's a very good exercise for you to do. So I'm assuming you have done something similar as well.
I have done something similar, and I think that a little bit later I'll show you guys something that can help you also as part like kind of visualize that. So I'm gonna wait for that question.
Yes, yes, for sure, for sure. I think that was the next thing I was going to ask you, but before we jump into like the tools, the thing you had called out specifically is finding the right partners and finding the right investments. I think let's pause there just for a moment. And you talked about, initially you didn't know all the people in the space, and then you started to meet and then get feedback from other folks. So that's a really good way. And I think that's how I got started as well in passive investing initially. And as I met the sponsors, absolutely to your point, looking at their track record, trying to understand how well have they exited. And if you are investing with somebody, I am myself like a newer syndicator, I would say, and I've been investing and I'm very actively involved, but who are the partners I'm working with? Because end of the day, you need to have really good partners you're working with who kind of holistically bring the entire investment for you moving forward. So the project has to be successful. Like from corporate background, I think we can kind of agree to that. There is projects, we have timelines, and we have a specific plan we want to achieve. And being able to make sure that we stay track on that project and then deliver what we promised. End of the day, that's really what we're trying to do for our investors. So thanks for sharing that. Any other tips would you share, for finding the right partners
Yeah.
or right indicators to work with?
Talk to people, and yes, the track record.
Yeah.
talk to people
Yes.
and ask the sponsors, right? Like to give you somebody that they can refer you, that's existing investor to kind of talk to. Although do expect that that person is probably going to be happy with the sponsor, obviously, because the sponsor is giving you the name. But ideally, if you can, try and find some people that have invested before with the sponsor, even without the sponsor's help, because then you might hear a little bit more of the honest opinion. So I know it's hard when we have jobs to try and find those communities and try and find those people, but do try. I mean, go to some meetings. Like there's some meetups, whatever area you are in. There's probably some meetups. There are some online meetups that you can go and join as a passive investor. Do try to participate in some of these things, because otherwise the chances of you running into somebody on the street or in your job, especially if you're in technology, I cannot tell you how hard this has been for me to convince my technology colleagues that real estate is the way to go, even though, they know I am retiring from my job because I'm investing in real estate. It's hard. So chances of running into those people in your job is very, very small. That's why, Divya, when we've talked, it's like you even going from that, hey, corporate technology, yay, 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 it's stock market only. It's really great to see more people that are branching out and actually try to help more tech people kind of understand the wrong ways they're going
Yeah.
about investing.
I think the hardest part from folks who are analytical, who have been in technology, we like to really synthesize all the data and look at all the numbers. And one of the things that is just a human behavior, and I'm going to call out, is you focus more on the things that didn't work out than the areas that did work out, And there's plenty of those areas in stock market, but we don't talk about that enough, where we are able to share here there are risks inherent with stock market, but you don't have control over it. There's no specific asset that you can go visit, go look at, see how like they're managing the property. Stocks, you don't know what the board is talking about. You don't know. Like Boeing was a big heartbreak for me. I put a ton of money when Boeing went down. I thought I was like, okay, this is the time to buy a Boeing stock. It has not come up. It's been 3 years. So I'm like starting to sell that stock at this time, and I've just started to like cut my losses and move to real estate. So like I've been burned pretty hard on stocks at time with exactly that thought process. Hey, like stocks should go up. So thanks for sharing that. Without further ado, I think I would love for folks to kind of see the tool that you have created. I think it's really visually, at least for me, it's exciting to see numbers and kind of the projections that it shows.
Yeah. So I'll share my screen. First, I'll go through like two slides just to
Sure.
kind of show
Yeah.
you like really how to kind of read it, but then we can also jump in, because the reason I created this tool was I found so many passive investors, and I mean people period, have this really hard time understanding the compounding and understanding how continuous investing can help them.
Mhm.
So let me share my screen quick, and I'll go through two slides that are pre-made, and then we can dive in. And if somebody wants to recreate a particular example, we can. And if you want to go and play with it, go. But so I took an assumption of 100K invested, which is typical. There is a lot of times you can also see 50 minimum investment. Uh, Also taking into account that each year you might want to add into your investments. Annual distributions of 5%, that's cash on cash return. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, like watch some of Divya's other videos. I'm pretty sure there's like a lot more information about that. Project length of 5 years with a multiple of 2x. And with a lot of syndications, you will realize that it's not like the market. In the market, you can go and you make $1,000, you can put $1,000 back into the market. With syndications, you usually have a minimum. So I chose a pretty low minimum of 25,000. So the moment you collect $25,000 from your distribution or your 10K yearly contributions, you can reinvest that. So let's take a look at what this looks like over 16 years. And there we go.
So Prolet, if it's okay, I'd just love to just phrase it one more time for folks, because I know there's a few folks here who have, it's first time them hearing about multifamily and kind of real estate investing. So Prolet, what she just mentioned is 100,000 of initial investment. That's your principal amount you're starting with. Now, annual distribution, basically, this is what you can think about as dividends from a stock perspective, but these are your yearly distributions you're getting. Most of the stocks today, I think the highest one that I know, of course, near to my heart, is still Target stock, which is about at 2.1%. They're one of the highest ones. Most of them range about 1% dividend returns, unless you do REITs, which is different conversation. So that's kind of the distribution you're looking at with real estate. Now, the length of the project is, the length of time it will take for us to buy a property and then to sell it in 5 years for profit. Usually we predict for 5 years. That number, we try for it to be about 2x. So 2x means if you invested 100,000, our goal is to double that money at the end of 5 years for 200,000. When Prolet mentioned about the distributions being reinvested, so let's say you had the 100,000 and say over the period of time, you got about 25,000 back. So she's making an assumption in her model that if you got enough money, like 25,000, you will reinvest it in that, either that or a different real estate property so that you can continue to benefit from those. So Prolet, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, much better summary.
No, you're good. You're good.
And you can see kind of the visualization, and when we jump into the tool, you can actually roll over each of the quarters and see all the numbers individually. But the biggest outcome I want you to take a look is kind of the summary. So by the end of 15 years, provided that you basically only invested 100,000, and about I think total contributions of 240,000, because each year you also added another 10,000, your portfolio would have grown to basically like 1.2 million. Wow. And that's like amazing. You're not going to get that return from the S&P 500. I did add the gray line is the S&P 500, which has a historic annualized return of 11 point something %. But it's just a very different perspective of like, hey, where can you be? Because for me, I mean, especially if you're in technology and you have the opportunity, 100K initial investment is not that bad, and then annually be contributing 10K is also not that hard. The other parts is that you can actually think about investing in syndications with your self-directed IRAs, your solo 401ks. So just another investment vehicle that you should think about it. The tool is there to visualize. So I call this view more the wealth building stage of your portfolio. And I have a slide that kind of summarizes your I'm living off of my investments, which is something I also did.
I want to call out a couple quick things. Yes. I just want to take a minute and just appreciate Prolet. Like, this is in her free time, she does this. This tool is available for free to you. It's something because she's passionate about real estate. When I met her, I think she sold me more on real estate than I already was sold on. So it's a tool she's created for passive investors like myself and, most of you on the call, to kind of start really thinking about if you were to map out, with real estate and kind of what those returns would look like. This is visually, really appealing. Couple numbers even to call out here that she mentioned, the AAR, which is that 20% year over year return that you're getting. And she mentioned from S&P, it's 11.1%. So those are the two numbers you're trying to compare over time. And that's really fascinating because S&P return, they don't talk about inflation. So I know we have a lot of numbers on the screen, but coupled to kind of focus on is you've started with 100,000 investment. You keep reinvesting 25,000 you're making from it until about, the 15-year time period here. And then you continue to invest about 10,000 every single year. And the money you will have at the end of that is, 1.1 million. So that's a fascinating number. I think most of the people I talk to want to continue to reinvest about 100K every year. And Prolet, I just was going to ask you if you're okay sharing how much were you investing in those first 4 or 5 years before you were able to quit your job?
The money and reinvest it in syndications. I took basically like anything. I didn't really contribute to 4K or IRAs other
Yeah.
than my match of the company, and everything else was going into
Real estate. So that's
syndications.
really good. So thanks for sharing. You were on the aggressive side. I think I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of that, where I do have still enough investments in stock, but then I am kind of looking at, can I take 50 to 60% of my yearly income and kind of invest it back in real estate? So that's kind of how I think about it. So if you're making 500,000 a year, I would be looking to put like 250 of that in real estate because of some of the benefits you also get from a tax depreciation point of view. So go ahead. Okay. Thank you for sharing that
Um,
deposit.
Yeah, one other thing that I wanted to point out, which I didn't mention, is that 5% by the 5% yearly distributions by the end of those 15 years, you're looking at about 47,000 of annual distributions from your initial investment.
Wow.
So that is how you are really looking at, well, like what happens at the end of the tunnel? How do I live off of that money? And that's where the second slide is. It's the same assumptions for distributions and like how the projects work, but at that point we're talking about, like, let's say that you already have 1 million invested in real estate, and at that point anything you get as distributions you just live off of. So on the 1 million with 5% distributions, we're obviously talking about 50K, right? And I compared it with syndications versus having 1 million in the S&P 500, which has like an yearly, this is the dividend that you will be getting. I think it's like 1.6, 1.7%. So what I did is two things. So let's assume that I have 1 million invested. I'll be living on that money, 50K, like obviously that's not enough to actually live on, but you can kind of multiply and look at it. But uh, what we're taking is living off that 50K and actually taking out of S&P 500 the equal amount. So you basically take 50,000 K of distribution. So however much you get from syndications, you take that much of S&P 500. So year one, whatever, year six, at that point, your distributions would be at 87,500, and your portfolio will be still at 1.75 million versus the S&P 500, you're looking at like 1.4 million of portfolio, mainly because of that more bigger growth. What's interesting is now that we're getting further into that retirement, in year 11, your real estate portfolio would be at 3 million with $150,000 of distributions, versus at that point your S&P 500 portfolio would be at 1.75 million, and you would have to progressively be taking more and more money out of the portfolio itself in order to equal the same distributions as in real estate. Now, I know it takes a lot of time to process some of these things, so like we can make a couple of these slides available for you guys to take a look and try to even calculate it for yourself. But this is something that you need to go through as thinking of like, hey, where I'm now, what my plans are, when can I be out and not really worry about this.
This is really good, Prahlad. So if I could ask, just for my clarification here, the amount that you show on the invested line, is that the amount that you're reinvesting each year? Is that the leftover amount from the prior years?
So this is a starting portfolio of 1 million,
Okay.
and you are reinvesting what you are making upon sale.
Okay.
You're not reinvesting your distributions. So in a way, you're continuously letting your portfolio grow, because most of that, if you're making 20% average annual return, basically you're just using 5%, and that 15% gets to grow in the future because you're reinvesting it. But you are taking that draw of 50K, or basically the 5%. And for those of you who are not familiar, chances are this 50K, this 150K, you're taking pretty much tax deferred because of depreciation that is available as part of real estate investing. So this is almost like a very easy way to think of like, hey, this is pretty much what you're taking home because you don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for sharing this. I think it's fascinating to see your initial investment of 1 million and where it can take you. On the flip side, a lot of the people I talk to do not have, this amount of money to start with. So what they end up doing is kind of really looking at, okay, if I invested 50,000 a year, or if I invested 100,000 a year, what would it look like? And I love that you kind of just brought up the calculator for that exact
Yeah.
example.
So this is, and we can put the link in the chat too, but this is what I created. It's just a tool that you can go and customize, yeah, how much you're starting to invest, how many more yearly contributions you have, what's your reinvestment threshold, because you might decide that it's 50,000. Are you reinvesting the distributions or not? Yearly distribution, hold period, equity multiple, and you can choose how many years you want to simulate, because you might want to simulate more than 16 and see what it looked like in 30. So I think that you said that people talk about reinvesting maybe 50,000 a year. Well, let's first do it with just 10,000 a year, so we can see what the numbers are, which is basically this, which is similar to what you saw earlier.
Mhm.
And if we go and say that, like, hey, you know what, let's say that we want to add 50,000, you can now see what you're looking at. So for 50,000 additional a year, you're looking at a portfolio value of basically 3.3 million at the end of 15 years.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And we will definitely include this link in the notes as well. And I'll send out an update kind of after this call too. So we have a question from Joy. She is asking the amount that you would reinvest, are they into the same syndication deal?
No, I mean, first of all, once you invest in a syndication deal, hold on, let me stop sharing my screen because the amount you invest in the syndication deal, it's basically there and that's it, right? The deal is done. So when you're reinvesting, you are reinvesting in something else. So you take all the money that were distributed or the money from sale and you go and invest in a new deal. And I mean, two things. I mean, it's good to diversify. You don't want to just put all of your eggs in one basket. And then the second part is that by that time, your other deal is gone, right? You usually have a deal, it raises in like sometimes a couple of weeks, if not shorter, and it's gone.
Yeah.
So you pay attention when deals come through
Yeah.
because you do have to be like, okay, I want to invest or I don't want to invest. But yeah, you usually invest in something different.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out, Prolet. So a question kind of in the chat. So syndication deal, just another way to say basically, in past, and I'll just share just a little bit of history. Early, I'd say mid 2000s, until then, only big companies were able to buy these apartment buildings, and it was not available to kind of the main street investors like you and I. But at that time, there were rules and regulations passed for syndications. Basically, people can come together, put their money investment together, and buy these bigger investment deals. So when we basically are bringing in a group of investors to buy a larger property, that's called a syndication deal. And the goal is, something that Prolet or I myself may not be able to purchase. When we go in with a group of investors, we can purchase something bigger together and then benefit together from it. So that's kind of when we call syndication deal, that's what it means. Great question. I think with that, we are getting some really good questions. I am going to allow participants to ask verbal questions. So feel free to keep putting them in chat, but if you would like to also verbally ask questions, we can do that.
And one more thing to point out is that think of it as if you try and go and buy a single family home and put 100,000 down, you're investing in one asset, one single door, you don't have the diversification. But with syndications, in theory, you can actually split that 100K into two deals of 50K. And now you're diversified. You're diversified between different assets. You're diversified possibly against different regions. You might be diversified with different sponsors. It's the what is it called, the world is your oyster.
Well,
Uh,
this year, yes.
yeah.
So, like this has been a really kind of good way to kind of think about it. I think it's very meaningful, especially for people like myself and you who come from a technology background, I would say a professional background, to then be able to realize, hey, we are able to invest differently, and then it leads to potentially more time and still do things that we love. I love the fact you still have gone back to technology and contribute back in the ways that you love and enjoy. But besides that, what else do you do? And I know I called the word retirement, so maybe we'll take a minute and kind of say, what does it mean to you? Like, what are you able to focus on now that you couldn't before?
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes my husband says that I'm more busy than when I had my job itself, but I would call it more I'm busy with the things that I would like to do, and I am doing them when I want to do them. So, for example, I just came back from a trip which was 2 months across Asia. And initially, I had all these ideas of like, oh, I'm going to work on so many things while I'm traveling. And when I got there, I was like, why? Right? I don't have to. And that is really what for me is the most valuable thing. It's like the fact that I don't have to, but I choose to. A lot of people say like, oh, I want to retire, I want to retire, but everyone usually tells you you really need to think about what you're retiring to, not what you're retiring from, because it's very easy for us to really hate our jobs and sit there and just be like, oh my god, I want to quit my job, I want to quit my job. But you do have to think about like what you're doing next.
Yeah.
And I would completely admit it took me a solid year to even get into the mindset of like, hey, you know what? I can wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, or I can wake up at 10 if I want to. And if I want to sit, and I've been doing this like recently, if I want to sit for the whole day and actually watch a bunch of cooking shows, because like for some reason I want to cook something specific, I can. So it's really that freedom of choosing what you are spending your time on. For me, that's a lot of travel. It's also kind of getting involved with other things. Like, yes, I am working on this tool. I'm actually working on something that's a little bit more complex, of a tool that is going to help people again with that kind of evaluation of what my portfolio can look like for syndications. And I'm involved with some organization in either real estate or in analytics that I still really enjoy. But it's my time and I spend it how I want it to.
That's wonderful to hear. So we have a couple questions, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on it. I think a couple of them are syndication related specifically, so I'll answer that, and then there's one specific to your calculator. So the first question is, how secure are these syndication deals? End of the day, this is exactly what Prolet was talking about. You need to know the sponsors you're working with, talk with them, have a conversation, have an understanding as far as um, the work that they have done prior. Have they done a good project execution so far? So work with them, have a conversation, get to know them. That's really important. The second question related to that is, what happens after 10 years of tax savings on this investment? Usually most of these investments last between 3 to 5 years, and your CPA can help you a little bit more in detail with that. And if you have specific tax related questions, I have a couple contacts I can share with you as well, so feel free to reach out to me directly on it. But in short, the investments, every single year that you're getting money, you're paying taxes on what you earned, but there is depreciation that offsets some of those gains as well. So over time, what you're going to see is the benefits of real estate and the depreciation you're able to get. You're not paying money, you're not paying taxes on the gains. There are other ways to reduce taxes on your gains. So I'll pause there. I'm not a CPA, but if you want more specific details about the taxes, we can talk about that, and I can provide some referrals as well. Great, Suresh. The other question we have is related to, Prolet, to the calculator you showed. So are these numbers that Prolet is showing in the calculator per individual or per syndicate? I think
So
you mean, is it like multiple syndications or one syndication?
So that is your choice. It's really about the money. You will find that a lot of syndication deals are pretty similar. Most of them you would be hearing like 2x in 5 years in the multifamily space. So this is a little bit more of a generic, like, hey, I invest 100K. You can invest in one, you can invest in two, you can invest 200K and invest in like the same deal or 3 or 4 deals. So it's up to you what amount you want to spread across different deals. This is an overall aggregate, what it can look like for you.
Great. Thank you for that. And I know, Julie, Ben, I see your picture, but I see Julie's name on it. So go ahead. Sounds like you have a question.
Hey, Divya. Question. Like what's the threshold for investment? Like y'all keep throwing out numbers like $100,000. Do I have to have $100,000 to get started? Or like
Yes.
what's the smallest amount?
Yeah, so this usually the smallest amount is 50,000 for most of the investment deals that are coming out. On rare occasions, you may hear some people reduce it further to 25,000 depending on the relationship. So I would work with the syndicator that you know, the person who's gonna providing these deals, and work through it with them.
Are you a syndicator?
I am. So yeah, we can talk later about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So in a danger to like actually hurt Divya a little, I would say that last thing she said is completely right. Talk with a syndicator, because I think I always feel that there is a room to negotiate. I've had a lot of syndicators where I go and say like, hey, you know what? I don't know you. I want to invest 25K, see how it goes, and then we'll go from there. And that is perfectly valid thing for me to do. So, yes, a lot of them will list 50K, but I think that sometimes is negotiable, especially for your first investment.
Yeah. Yep. Great point. A question from Chi. What is your worst syndication deal as a LP, and what are the 3 things you learned from it?
Okay, so my worst syndication deal that went full cycle returned basically 1% a year. So those things happen. That's why you need to diversify across multiple deals and multiple sponsors. And really, with that one, the syndicator just couldn't manage to manage the property. So for me, it was one of my earlier deals. It's like really, really try and understand a little bit more what the exits and what the previous projects looks for those indicators. I do have some deals right now that I would say they stop distributions, but at the same time, I know what their plan is. So the biggest thing for me is, again, know your syndicator, and also don't ever be afraid to ask what their plan is if something is not going right. Like, read your quarterly emails that come with it, attend the webinars that they create. The webinars are actually great because sometimes you hear questions from other people that you might not have thought about asking. So it's a passive investment, but you still do need to monitor it, but not like you would do a single family home where you have to go and deal with why the garage door is not opening. So be an active passive investor.
Yeah, that's a great response. Have you considered becoming a GP? And if so, why or why not?
I think that was a trick question because I know Anna, and she knows my stance. And it's like, no, I do not want to be a GP. Honestly, it's a lot of responsibility for me. It's also a lot of work. As I mentioned, I went traveling for 2 months. I didn't want to work. I didn't. If I was a GP, if there was a problem or if I had to take care of it, I had to take care of it because I would feel too responsible for my investors' money. So for me, I am a passive investor.
Yeah, Prolet, I would love to kind of jump in and share my thought process on that too. So I was exactly where you are as well. So I started out being a passive investor, wanted to continue to do that passive investing. I was like, this is beautiful. And for me, I saw this opportunity to share information with more people, and you're doing that as well, and be actively involved in kind of identifying behind the scenes, uncovering, what goes well, what doesn't go well, and then finding these deals and sharing it with people kind of firsthand. So that's kind of what excited me to become a general partner over time. let's say 15 years from now, if I'm doing general partner, I think that'll be another question maybe for another time. But, this message of being able to invest differently, I think needs to continue to get out there more.
From that perspective, I do want to give a book recommendation, which I'm actually in the
That's
process
great.
of
Yes.
reading right now. And it's Die with Zero. And I have
I love that.
heard a lot of people that it has changed their kind of mindset of what does it mean to actually invest. So, and when is enough. So I would highly, highly recommend that book. My second book recommendation for those of you who are new and passive investing, it's called The Hands-Off Investor by Brian Burke. It's all about how do you invest as a passive investor. It's amazing book. I wish it was there, not when I was halfway through my investing, but like 5 years before, because it probably would have changed my mindset to begin with.
Yeah, love that, Prolet. I would love to kind of just add to that, like Die with Zero. I read it completely, changed my mindset. I think it's very difficult. So I had written just a recent post about, my grandparents came from Depression era. Then so did my mom. Kind of carried those thoughts until about, I would say 5 years ago. Very similar mindset for myself as well. Don't spend, continue to save. Don't think about what it is. In future, you'll have fun. And when I read that book recently, it kind of just reminded me of all the reasons why I had been doing it, because you're only a certain age by a certain time. And there are certain things that you loved doing at 20 that you no longer like doing at 30, which you may not like doing at 40. And, your interest in growth change. So really focusing on those life experiences in each decade of life. And a lot of the interesting facts that they shared in the book was, how many people honestly die with a lot of money in their bank thinking that they want to give it to their kids, which is great. If the kids are able to take that money and really use it for good experiences, great. But for the most time, that is just not how it ends up. And people kind of have these regrets that they wanted to travel through Asia for a couple of months and really, spend time with the family. And they couldn't do that because they were too busy working or saving money. So I loved reading that book.
Yeah, and I think that when you think about that book, you can also think how much better it is to be a passive investor, because then you actually really don't have to worry about like what am I doing? It's like I'm on a kind of like cruise control, my investments are on cruise control, and you're focusing on what you love.
Yes. Well, thank you, Prolet, so much for your time. I know we only have a couple minutes left. I do have a couple more minutes left, Prolet. If you do, I will just take a minute. If you need to leave and get to your next things, feel free. But if you have any other questions, we'll just give you a couple more minutes to ask those now before we end our session today. So I'll wait on the chat just for a quick 30 seconds, see if anybody has questions, or verbally, you all should have access to unmute yourself and ask.
So for those who are here, I had asked Divya if I can plug something.
Oh yeah, please. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of my passions is analytics, and I've been doing it for a long time, and I still really, really like to support the community. So I am actually working on an event called Measure Camp Austin. So if you're in the Austin area and you're in an analytics field or know somebody in the analytics field, it's a free unconference event. It's amazing experience. It's a community-driven, community-run event. Free to join. So come and join us, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a great event. Thank you, Prolet. So before you all kind of move from this meeting, if there were links that were shared or information,